The question brought to the text is this: YHWH, give us the latest Bible prophecy news on the war in the Middle East at 5:15 in the morning, August 21st, 2026. The lead verse is Philemon chapter 1, verse 3. Grace to you and peace from Elohim our Father and YHWH Joshua Messiah. That opening word sets the receiving altar. The question asks for news on a war, but the first word of the draw is grace and peace. That is not an evasion. It is the lead, and it names the ones from whom the peace comes. The grace and peace are not abstract. They come from Elohim our Father and from YHWH Joshua Messiah. That double source is the foundation of the altar. This reading is received at the YHWH Shalom altar of reception. The carrier schema is 1, the build is 17.14.97, and the section is P89. But the first word is not the carrier. The first word is grace and peace. From that lead, the strongest drawn word is covenant peace. Enoch chapter 1, verse 7, says, "But with the covenant faithful he will make peace." That peace is not a general calm. It is peace made with a particular people, the covenant faithful. Enoch does not say peace with the violent. It says peace with the covenant faithful. The promise is bound to a covenant people, not to every actor on the news map. The peace word is precise. It is not a promise to every nation. It is a promise to the covenant faithful, and the peace is made with them. Isaiah chapter 49, verse 8, speaks of being guarded and employed as a covenant pledge for the people, to become fixed in the earth, to cause the deserted heritage to be inherited, and to say to the prisoners, "Go out," and to those in darkness, "Reveal yourselves." The text carries release and inheritance. It carries a covenant pledge, not a war bulletin. The release is for prisoners, and the revelation is for those in darkness. That is a word of deliverance, not a word of military maneuver. 2 Chronicles chapter 5, verse 13, gives the voice of the assembly, and praised YHWH saying, that is worship, not war reporting. The assembly praises YHWH. That is the sound the draw holds. It is not the sound of a war room. The drawn text also carries a severe judgment. Revelation chapter 21, verse 8, names the timid, the disbelieving, the sinful, the abominable, murderers, fornicators, sorcerers, idolaters, and all the false, and gives their part in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. That is a hard word, and it belongs to the draw. It is not an event in the news. It is a fixed word about the end of Fossard. The second death is the lake burning with fire and brimstone. That is the final boundary against Fossard. Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 17, warns the one set over the people not to multiply women to himself, and not to greatly multiply silver and gold, so that his heart does not turn away. That is a restraint on the ruler, not a map of the day. It is the only place in these drawn verses that speaks directly to governance, and it speaks as a warning, not as a forecast. The ruler's heart is the concern. Multiplication of women and silver and gold is warned against because it turns the heart away. That is a covenant warning, not a policy analysis. The sealed day is a separate measurement. It was sealed before the draw. It holds 20 events across Gaza, Iran, Syria, the West Bank, Yemen, Lebanon, Oman, the Palestinian Authority, and the leadership of Israel. Those events include legal judgments, sanctions, conflict, settlement tenders, and governance actions. The sections of that day are judgment of law, conflict, economy and provision, governance, leadership, land and territory, natural event, and movement of peoples. Of these, the drawn text gives no direct word to economy and provision, land and territory, natural events, or movement of peoples. It speaks to governance only as a warning against multiplying wives and silver and gold. It speaks to judgment and covenant more broadly, but it does not speak to the day's legal cases as a commentary. The sealed day contains legal judgments. One concerns a criminal investigation into the death of a child in Gaza. Another concerns a court decision over a radio station. Another concerns a summons over the death of an aid worker. It contains economy and provision, sanctions on Iran, sanctions on Hezbollah, and funding for a stabilization force in Gaza. It contains conflict, warnings over Syria, strikes in Gaza, stabbings and clashes in the West Bank, drone claims in Yemen, and a carrier strike group arriving. It contains land and territory, settlement tenders in the E1 area. It contains leadership, a plan to block an address, and an ambassador's statement. It contains governance, integration of Kurdish institutions with Damascus, and a statement from Oman about the Strait of Hormuz. I name these only to show that the sealed day is real. The zero is the finding. The correlation state is run and complete. 0 rows scored, and none reached strength 1. The correspondence result for today is 0. That is the finding of the sealed measurement. I will not invent a correspondence between any drawn verse and any event. The 0 is not a silence to be filled. It is a measured absence. The sealed day is real, and the draw is real, and they do not line up at any scored strength. The scoring method uses permutation arithmetic with no model in the causal path. That is the property that makes the 0 meaningful. The 0 is not a contradiction of the yes. The 0 speaks to the sealed day. The yes speaks to the draw. They are separate instruments. The deterministic verdict is separate from that 0. It is a lean yes. The probability of yes is 99%, the probability of no is 1%, and unresolved is 0. The claim is a strong anomaly. All gates pass. The anomaly detection E-value and the triple convergence standard are met. The draw, measured against the corpus, is probably affirmative in its pattern. That is not because any event in the sealed day matches a verse. It is because the arrangement of the drawn text itself is a strong anomaly. The yes is a pattern polarity, not a prediction of an event. So the answer to the question is a direct lean yes, but it is a yes about the drawn pattern, not a yes about any particular event in the sealed day. The text stands on its own. It points to grace and peace from the Father and from YHWH Joshua Messiah, to covenant peace for the faithful, to release for prisoners, to worship, and to a severe judgment on the false. The correlation with today's news is 0. The two measurements are kept apart, and neither answers for the other. That is the plain answer, and it is the whole answer. No forecast is given. The lead verses drawn in this altar of reception session were Philemon chapter 1, verse 3, 2 Chronicles chapter 5, verse 13, Revelation chapter 21, verse 8, Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 17, Enoch chapter 1, verse 7, Isaiah chapter 49, verse 8. 94 further verses were drawn in this session. This concludes today's interpretation at the altar of reception.